All rights reserved with Yolanda Taylor on Choice.
Good morning, and welcome to another episode of All Rights Reserved. It is Saturday morning at 9 a.m. And before we go any further, I want you to do something real quick. Go grab your coffee or grab your tea. Call your family into the room with the families there and lean in with me for just one moment. Because what we're going to talk about today, this is a 101 with me today. But what we're discussing, it affects your whole entire household, your future, your children, and your vote. This show has always been about law and politics and real life. But today, again, it's just me. It's just you, no guests, no interviews, just truth, just connection, and just a little bit of accountability for all of us. Over the past few weeks, I've sat across from leaders, advocates, and public officials, and every single conversation, no matter the topic, kept circling back to one thing: power, and who has it, and who gets left out. When I spoke with Senator Natalie Murdoch, we talked about the primary elections and who lost their seats, the winners and the losers. But let me tell you something. Those outcomes didn't just happen. They were decided by who showed up at the ballot box. And the reality is, a lot of people did not show up. Imagine what could have happened if we all would have showed up. And that conversation with Senator Natalie Murdoch really got me to thinking, if we don't show up for a primary, if we don't show up for the general, then who is really going to be in power to make decisions about our communities? Then I had the opportunity to sit down with Councilman Grady Buzzy right here in Knightdale, North Carolina. We talked about leadership, not titles, not positions, but real leadership and real community service. And what does it mean to grow up, to be an athlete like Councilman Grady Buzzy, to be disciplined and still choose to then later serve your community in a variety of ways. And what really stood out to me about that conversation is we have a man that really could spend his time doing a ton of other things. He could be traveling, he could be tuned out, he could just be focusing on himself and his family, but he's advocating for people in Knightdale. He works for the city of Raleigh, so he has even advocated for people in Raleigh. But one of the most important things that really touched me was that he's advocating for a community center right in Knightdale. And I shared my story with him about how community centers matter, how it mattered to me as a young kid growing up, how it was the only opportunity in Wilson, where I live, for a Black kid like me to learn how to swim. Community centers are important. But why is that something, as basic as a safe place for children and families to be, and kids and neighborhoods to gather? Why is something that basic? Why does it still require a fight? Because it's going to be on this November national general election. It's going to be on the ballot for those folks who live in Knightdale. They get to choose whether or not they want to spend taxpayer dollars supporting a community center. And it sounds like a great thing to me. I can't tell y'all how to vote, but it still requires a fight. Then the week after that, I had the opportunity, or 2 weeks after that, I had the opportunity to speak to Octavia Rainey. And we got real, y'all. If you live in Raleigh, then you know Octavia Rainey. She's a fiery, passionate, grassroots, fair housing advocate, civil rights advocate. We talked about who's locked out of housing opportunity. We talked about the non-refundable application fees that seems to have a disproportionate impact on Black women who lose their money but still are locked out of housing. We talked about zoning and development in Raleigh. We talked about land use decisions that the Planning Commission is making and which the City Council of Raleigh eventually votes on. We talked about gentrification and displacement and the erasure of Black history. These are all ballot box issues. These are issues that if you're a voter or you plan to be a voter in November, you got to really go beyond the name recognition. You got to really get to know how your city council person in your district votes. You got to analyze the mayor because people can say things, they can show up at events, they can do all the photo ops, they can shake your hand, they can be nice to you, but that doesn't mean they've earned your vote. People should have to work harder to earn your vote. They should do more than smile and give you a handshake. Because let me break it down in plain terms this Saturday morning. People are paying, again, just to apply for housing. Some of the application fees are $100, some are $75. And some of the landlords already know that they're not going to give this person housing, but yet they take the application fee, right? That could be gas money. That can be a bill money. That can go towards a prescription drug. So we have people out here losing their money just because they're trying to apply for housing. We also talked about how if you're a renter, you have to prove that you earn 3 times the rent amount before you can even get an apartment. So families are really being pushed out of neighborhoods right here in Raleigh. In Rocky Mount possibly, in Wilson, but certainly in a triangle where housing affordability has skyrocketed, right? And we talked again, like I said, about decisions involving land. You know, our city council has the opportunity to either approve or reject the recommendation that comes from its planning committee, right? There have been important decisions happening in Raleigh that impacted who got pushed out of communities and who got to stay, right? And there have been times when those who are currently on our city council, probably the city council person for your district, voted in a way that placed developers over people. So these are things you really got to look out for. But prior to speaking with Octavia Rainey, I had an opportunity to speak with former Mayor Pro Tempore, Mark Anthony Middleton. He was the former Mayor Pro Tempore of Durham. He added another layer. We talked about how leadership is about balancing growth, right? But making sure that growth doesn't come at the expense of people. So I'm saying all this because I want you to understand that voting is just not voting for just to go out there and say I voted, right? It's not just so you can have a photo op with I voted. It's just not because you're standing on the shoulders of our ancestors. That is important. But voting is because it affects these real kitchen table issues. It impacts your day-to-day life. So I ask you again, when you're thinking about who you're going to vote for on city council, who is growth for in Raleigh and Durham and some of these other areas and in Wilson? Who is development for? Is it for the wealthy? Is it for the middle class? Is it for the working class? Is it for the service workers? The service workers that we learned during the pandemic were needed for the economy to continue going, right? You may remember the term essential workers. Remember there was a term that there were essential workers that still needed to go to work, like police officers, even teachers had to work. I mean, they were virtual, but they still had to go to work. CNAs, doctors, people at the hospital, grocery store clerks. The grocery store did not shut down one time during the pandemic, right? People who had to still keep it going, right? These hotel staff, I mean, if the hotels were open, service workers, people who are usually and typically low-wage people, these people are needed in order to have a sustainable economy. You may be someone who's an essential worker, right? So housing and living wages, that's on the ballot box. You know, our General Assembly, who you vote for to represent you at the state level, can make decisions about whether or not we need to go from a very low minimum wage state to maybe a living wage state, right? I mean, come on. We're North Carolina and the minimum wage is still like, well, I think $7.25, if not $7.50. That's ridiculous. Who can live off that? Nobody. People can't even live off $15 an hour in this area, you know? So, you know, there used to be discussion that maybe $15 an hour was a livable wage. Not anymore. I mean, I'm thinking we need to get up there to like $30, if not more. for people to be able to afford the basic things that they need. And so these are, again, are not just kitchen table issues and discussions that we have in our groups and with friends and with our family members. These are ballot box issues. So we need to always remember, who is opportunity being curated for in our cities? Now, another issue that I just want to ground here that's been a hot topic in Raleigh. I talk a lot about Wilson and Rocky Mount in Eastern North Carolina. I love y'all, but y'all need to tune in, even though I'm talking about Raleigh, because this can happen in Wilson and Rocky Mount or in Eastern North Carolina. It may already be happening, right? This is a serious conversation. It is about crime, perception of who's causing crime, and fairness when it comes to law enforcement, right? Or our DA. And the DA in Raleigh, or in Wake County, I should say, is on the ballot. So depending on where you live, you need to look at your ballot. You need to see what roles and positions are on the ballot. Because I'm in a sense, I'm breaking down the ballot for you today, right? And who's on the ballot and who has the power to make decisions. So the prosecutor or the DA is on the ballot, I know for sure, here in Wake County. So I want to talk about, because crime always comes up in these conversations. And then you have people, right? People being slick with their mouths, right? They're not saying it, but they're saying it. They're trying to blame a certain group of people, usually people who look like us, for being the ones who are always causing crime, right, in the cities. Because every time we talk about things like housing that may not seem related, and every time we talk about public spaces like maybe a bus station that may not seem related, and every time we talk about going downtown Raleigh, somebody always wants to say something like, it's not safe down there because those people at the bus station, they're committing incidences of assault and, harassment. And I'm not saying that it doesn't occur, right? I'm not trying to sugarcoat crime. We all know that crime is on the rise, not just in Raleigh, not just at the bus station, but on Glenwood South, the Bar District as well, throughout Raleigh. There was a recent article that someone got shot up at the Food Lion, right? On Cremore Road. That's in North Raleigh. So it's throughout the city, right? So why are we trying to, and I'm not talking about us, why are some folks trying to make it seem as if the bus station has become, in their words, and I quote, a cesspool of crime and criminal activity, right? But let me be clear this morning. Like I said, safety does matter. People do deserve to feel safe in their communities. Lord knows I want to feel safe when I walk outside, right? You want to feel safe, right? But what we also have to talk about is this. How is crime treated, right? How is crime treated? There's proactive policing going on in downtown Raleigh and southeast Raleigh now. It started when an influx of wealthier, more white individuals began to move downtown Raleigh. That's when we really saw that there was proactive policing. Now, how does proactive policing differ from reactive policing? Well, reactive policing is that the police shows up when you call them, right? Or when an incident has been reported. Proactive policing is when they're just walking around and they're looking for crime and they're profiling and they're looking at cars. I mean, this has been on social media. This has been in the news that they'll go around to maybe a local sweepstakes place, right? And they start looking in cars and they're looking for who they could arrest that day, basically, is how I'm saying it, because they're being proactive. They call before crime happens. They're trying to be proactive. But to be proactive before crime happens, that means that you don't have reasonable suspicion that a crime has occurred. You don't even have that, but you're looking for criminal activity. And when that happens, that can be very dangerous because that's how biases show up in our criminal justice system. Who's being watched the most? The guy sitting on the bench just drinking his $2 malt liquor ice house, or the young, wealthy people that's on the movable trolley bar, right? that are obviously drunk as well, But who gets the citation? Well, there's a true story that was published in the News and Observer by a journalist that I like. His name was Josh Schaefer. He published an article about how there was a guy sitting on the bench in the downtown Raleigh's Stroll and Sip district. I think Wilson has one now. I don't know, Rocky Mount, you may have a district where people are able to drink outdoors or take their drinks from the bar and drink outside in a certain area. Well, this guy was sitting on the bench in the Social Stroll and Sip district drinking maybe a $2 ice house, right? How is he any different than the other people who are leaving bars with their $12 cocktails, right? In a to-go cup in the district, right? Well, the article says that the police went up to him, took his drink, poured it out in a plant, and issued him a citation. I don't see you doing that to the wealthy little, I'm going to be real here, white kids walking around being drunk openly in the public, or the people going to the bars and coming out drunk, or Glenwood South. I mean, if that's happening, it hasn't been reported. But if you're in the social district, what's the difference between drinking a $2 ice house and drinking a $12 cocktail? Again, this shows how biases shows up in our system. This shows how people who look a certain way, and I think the article said he looked a bit haggard, and I don't know if that meant to say that maybe he was homeless. It didn't say he was homeless, but I mean, is he being profiled and treated differently because he may be perceived to be someone who's homeless? Because guys, we really need to see that this is based on who's in power, who are the judges that we elect, who may be able to see the biases and how people are treated, right? There are some judges who don't see biases because, we live in a society where people don't even want you to talk about race. If you talk about race, you're being accused of race baiting, right? You're being accused of bringing up something that they want to say doesn't exist anymore. And what people are trying to say is that racism doesn't exist anymore. And that's just crazy. Because we know that race is a man-made construct, right? We didn't even create it. But it's one of the original sins in our country. When Mark Anthony Middleton was here, we talked about how young America is compared to other countries like Asia and China, right? America is still fairly a young country, right? We have not gotten over race. I mean, in all my heart of hearts, I wish I could stop talking about race. I wish we were in a post-racial society, but that has not happened because of the sins of man, right? Because of the sins of man, the biases, the stereotypes, and the division in our country. We're not over it. So it's important that when we vote for judges who have a racial justice analysis, right? Who has an analysis about fairness, right? And who wants to objectively treat all people the same when they come before them, right? And that has to be a judge that's trained to identify their own biases. As a lawyer, I can't tell you how many times I've seen a judge's bias show up in a courtroom. I've had judges talk about their Christian faith, and I'm a Christian, but I don't think you should be talking about it in the courtroom. When you're supposed to be objectively hearing a case. I had a judge go out because my client said the GD word. Is it a word that I say? No, but I'm just saying she had a reason for saying it. She got ran off the road. She literally got ran off the road, and it was a domestic violence case I was trying, and the word slipped out, but that just turned the whole trajectory of the case a different way because he couldn't stand that word because he was a Christian man, So I'm telling you, biases show up in the courtroom, right? So we gotta really know and go beyond name recognition. We need to do the research of who to vote for and the prosecutor too, because let me talk about the prosecutor. This is breaking news in Raleigh and Wake County. Recently, right here in Wake County, there was a case. 6 people were stabbed, and the Wake County prosecutor dismissed the charges before trial. Now, to be fair, the Wake County prosecutor states that they saw a video and there was evidence that this guy was jumped and attacked and he stabbed 6 people out of self-defense. Those 6 people who were stabbed end up in the hospital for their injuries. He also ended up in the hospital because he also suffered injuries, right? And for the longest, no one knew what the mugshot was, but there were people, the racist people that get on social media and make comments like, I'm sure it's the usual suspects. We've all, if you're on social media, you've seen the racism, right? And, and then you see the racist memes and you see the racist slick comments coming out of these people who can now post anonymously, right? They can post anonymously now on social media, right? They're not courageous enough to stand by their comments. So all of that was already going on before the mugshot came out. So then finally, when they say that they were dropping all charges, that's when the mugshot was officially released. It did seep out on other media pages, but it's a white man, and hey, that's fine. I mean, I'm trying to be a lawyer here, and I am a lawyer, and I represent everybody. Okay, just because you're white does not mean that you're innocent. Just because you're white does not mean that you're guilty. I think, the facts have to be tried, right, by trier of fact. But the Wake County prosecutor, Lauren Freeman, who's not running again. We just had a primary too, right? And we know that Riley, had won on the Democratic ticket as far as for the cited prosecutor, and we will see him on the ballot in November as well, I believe. Can't recall. Don't quote me, guy. Can't recall if he has a Republican challenger, but I wouldn't be surprised if he does. But just when you go to vote in November, just think carefully about who's on the ballot for prosecutor, because this particular prosecutor dismissed the charges before trial. And I'm not a criminal defense attorney now, but I used to intern in the Wake County DA's office, like right out of law school. So I was able to kind of like work with all the different ADAs. It was a very unforgettable, valuable experience. I got to try cases because they're so overworked. They had a ton of cases. So it was a place to go as a graduating law school and get a ton of experience, trial experience. And I remember there was a special courtroom for affrays, assaults, and maybe some domestic violence cases, right? But there was a special courtroom. We used to call it the People's Court because it was like the People's Court, right? Somebody fighting, someone assaulting someone. And so typically those cases were not like automatically dismissed. A lot of them went before the judge. And the judge, who's known as the trier of fact, and let me break this down for you. The trier of fact can be a judge if it's a bench trial, or it can be a jury if it's a jury trial. But the trier of fact is the person that listens to all the facts, listens to both sides, look at all the evidence, and then determine based on what one side is saying and what the other side's defenses are, whether or not there is legitimate self-defense here. But we had the Wake County prosecutor dismiss these charges. I've never, and I could be wrong, but I've never seen this prosecutor do that, right? So someone in the studio, and I won't name their name, they said the topic of this episode should be criming while white. And I'm going to say it is criming while white because we're seeing a difference in treatment in Wake County. And you may be seeing it in Wake County. You may be seeing it in Edgecombe, Nash County. You may be seeing it in other counties, right? Like Greene County and I don't know, Wayne County. But I want to be very careful here because I want to say this intentionally. In our system, prosecutors do have discretion. They do. And cases can be dismissed for legal reason. Evidence does matter. But here's the question the community is asking. What happened? Release the video so we can see it, right? The facts, they're being very tight and clutch fists with the evidence that they say they've examined, right? So we want to know, like, why were the charges dismissed? There's some rumors going around that he allegedly, the guy who stabbed 6 people and whose charges were later dismissed, they're saying allegedly that he made some racial slur remarks to the people who jumped him and beat him up. I'm not saying that, that justifies him getting a beep kicking. I can't say it on air. I'm not saying that justifies it, but when I grew up, there are fighting words. Like, some things are just simple fighting words, right? Some people like, I'm just going to have to take that court charge if someone calls me the N-word, right? I'm not saying that people will justify for doing that, but what I'm saying is that adds more context, I should say, to the evidence and to the facts, right? But the main question is, why hasn't the public seen the video? Because let me tell you what happens when there is silence, when it looks like there's not transparency. People are going to fill in the gaps, and that's what people are doing. They're filling in the gaps. Like I said, there's a rumor going around that said he had allegedly made racial slurs. That has not been proven, but people are filling in the gaps because there's no transparency. And depending on who you are, those gaps get filled in with very different assumptions. So now you have this these group of people who are glad that the charges have been dropped, and now they want to see the people who beat them up arrested and charged. So stay tuned for that case. But if this was, a different, neighborhood, and I'm talking about, it was downtown Raleigh, right? It was downtown Raleigh, and there's already the stereotype that downtown Raleigh is unsafe, and there's already the stereotype that the people who commit the incidences of crime are coming from the Go Raleigh bus station that spills onto Wilmington Street. And I'm not saying that there are not social issues there. There's always been social issues and crime in downtown Raleigh. I've lived here since the early 90s. There's always been incidences, but I will say that homelessness has increased drastically because of the injection of wealth in low wealth communities. People have been evicted by landlords who said, why should I rent to you for $400 when I can fix up my unit and maybe get $2,000? And that's a landlord's right. But the fact remains, people have been forced out and displaced and have been forced into instability, right? So you do see a lot of mental health challenges going on. You do see a lot of maybe substance use going on as well publicly. You may also see people harassing people. You may see intoxication, but the intoxication by those who are getting off the bus or who ride the bus, to me, is no different than the intoxication I've seen in Glenwood South, Raleigh's bar district, right? I've seen people bar hop from one end of Glenwood South to the other end of Glenwood South, right? And I don't see them being harassed or targeted by police. Now, I do know that the city neighborhoods surrounding Glenwood South have complained about crime. I mean, one time there was a drive-by shooting. There's been a drive-by shooting in Glenwood South. A beloved restaurant owner in Glenwood South was killed by people in Glenwood South. There was even a long loved establishment that got busted as part of a drug sting operation. The employees were selling fentanyl. So come on now. So you're targeting and you're harassing people, low wealth, elderly, disabled, people with mental health challenges, people with health problems, because substance use is a health problem. If we can, and this is talking about crime in Wild White, opioid, right? I remember that crisis. I was in leadership at Legal Aid of North Carolina in Wilson when the community conversation began to treat opioid addiction as a health problem. But did we treat the crack epidemic as a health problem? Or did we criminalize people who were addicted to crack? Right? See how one substance use gets criminalized and another substance use or abuse gets treated as a health problem? So substance use is a health problem. And so we need a prosecutor, we need judges who are able to see things with a equity lens, right? And a racial justice equity lens, because I'm going to keep it real, because systemic racism exists. It's in every system in America. And when I talk about systems, I'm talking about the housing system, the transportation system, what's happening with people trying to move the Go Raleigh station from downtown Raleigh. I'm talking about employment, all these systems, there are invisible barriers, whether you want to believe it or not, that seem to treat one group differently than another. So we need to be able to see fairness in how different groups of people are treated. Would we be seeing the same outcome if this was a black guy, let's just keep it real, that stabbed a bunch of white people? And I don't know if the other group that stabbed him was black or white. I don't know, because again, there's no accountability or transparency by the DA's office or the police department. But will we be seeing the same outcome if it was a black guy that stabbed 6 people? Will the Wake County prosecutor be so fast to dismiss the charges? Will we be seeing the same level of transparency, right? The mugshot will have been released day one. We won't have had to guess who was the perpetrator, who was the person, right? Again, this is not an accusation. It's a question. These are questions, and it's a fair one. Because when people feel like the system is not transparent, decisions are not explained, and accountability is unclear, what you get is not trust. You get frustration, and you get what we're seeing, division. And here's why this ties into everything else we've talked about today. When crime is used as a reason to move bus stations, and that's what they're trying to do. They've already stigmatized it as unsafe, and they've already stigmatized the people who ride the bus as criminals. Crime is being used to displace the bus station. When we see that, when we see crime being used to displace communities of people, when we see crime being used as a reason to increase policing in certain areas, but at the same time, there are questions about how justice is being applied. So we should ask, is this really about safety? Is this about erasure? Is this just about development? Is this about who we choose to protect and who we don't? And those are hard questions, but they're fair questions. And they're necessary questions, because justice is not just about what happens in a courtroom. It's about whether or not the people believe the system is fair, and whether or not we believe we have the power to make the system fair. And what I'm saying, we do. When we go vote in November, we have the power. You better do your research on who the judges and the prosecutors are, or who may be on your ballot. So again, when we talk about elections, when we talk about leadership, when we talk about policy, we're also talking about who decides, like I said, how justice is applied, who controls the transparency, and who the system ultimately serves. And that's why, again, your vote matters. Justice isn't just about the outcomes. It's about trust in the process. And then, and I'm going to end on this segment. We talked about education, and we talked about redistricting, and how those in the General Assembly took, with a stroke of their pen and their maps, they basically reshaped District 1. And that's in Eastern North Carolina. But with Sue Perry Cole being a guest, and Angela Bryan and Gloria Davis coming on the show, they opened my eyes, and I hope they open your eyes, because you were able to see that something that seems so elevated and so, complex, like redistricting and how maps and districts are manipulated on maps, they broke it down to the community level. And you saw that ordinary people, of course, these are amazing women. They're not ordinary, but they are elderly seniors in their community that have expertise. They were able to flip and shape a school board in Edgecombe County. And that's how Gloria Davis became a newly elected school board member of the Edgecombe County School Board. So we see that, redistricting is important. It's not just lines on a map. It determines where your child goes to school, what resources they get, what opportunities they have, because then you've elected a champion who will ensure that your kids' needs are met, or who will go to bat fighting for it. And what amazed me the most about the conversation with Sue, Angela, and Gloria is that they were able to lay it out clearly how decisions shape our children's futures, and often made with so little public engagement, because they talked about that too, right? And lastly, I spoke with last week Representative James Robertson, and we talked about the budget in real life. And as we talked about the state budget, or should I say the lack of one, because as of yesterday and today, there's no state budget. We're the only state in the country without a state budget, and people are impacted. Teachers are not getting raises. A lot of things are happening. The community colleges are not being funded. Because when there's no budget, guys, that impacts schools, like I just stated, housing, healthcare, jobs. That's why families are sitting at the kitchen table making these hard decisions. Do I pay for medicine or groceries? Do I pay for rent, or do I fix my car? And here's the part we don't talk about enough. The people in those buildings, I'm talking about the General Assembly on Martin Street in Raleigh, are making decisions, and they're deciding who wins and who struggles. Get educated about who you elect to represent you in Raleigh. So as you sit here this morning, maybe with coffee in your hand, family around you, let me say this clearly, guys. We cannot sit the next election out. Get your IDs together. Make sure if you're not registered to vote, you're registered to vote. Get your families voted and registered to vote. Make sure their IDs are straight. We cannot set this election out in November. We saw what happened when 100% of us didn't show up, in 2026. We saw what happened, right? We cannot say I'm tired. We can't say I don't like politics. We have no choice. We have no choice because it's impacting our lives. We can't say my vote doesn't matter because it does. Look who got elected in 2026. Look at our new president, because everything we talked about this morning, housing, schools, parks, budgets, has your vote attached to it. And we cannot leave anybody behind, because when we don't show up, somebody else decides for us. And we see that happening now. Whew, I'm going to breathe. I said a mouthful. You've heard an earful. I hope it matters to you. This is all rights reserved. And the question is not whether you have rights. The question is, will you show up to protect them? That's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the show today. Enjoy the rest of your beautiful Saturday. But don't go anywhere. You want to stay plugged in. We got some more conversations coming up. You don't want to miss The Legal Way. It's coming up next. Stay plugged in to 92.1 FM Choice.